The storm had torn through the alien planet of Alaris like a monster that refused to rest. The sky was still gray, the ground soaked and broken. Fallen trees covered the hills. Metal sheets from ruined homes lay twisted in the mud, and the wind carried the smell of smoke and wet dust. In the middle of that wreck stood a human, David Cole, a repair engineer from Earth, looking at what was left of the small colony he had been sent to supply. He wasn't supposed to be here long. His mission was simple: deliver tools, check the power generators, and leave. But when the storm came, everything changed. His supply pod had crashed near the valley, and he had barely survived. Now, walking through the wreckage, David heard something that made him stop, a soft cry carried by the wind. He followed the sound until he reached a broken shelter made of metal scraps and clay. There, under the half-collapsed roof, an alien woman struggled to lift a beam twice her size. Her arms shook, her dark blue skin bruised and covered in dirt. Behind her, two small children huddled together, eyes wide with fear. The woman grunted, trying to move the beam again, but her hand slipped, and it fell with a heavy crash. She stumbled back, almost falling. That's when David ran forward without thinking. "Hey, careful," he said. His voice startled her. The alien woman gasped and turned sharply, holding a sharp metal rod in defense. Her eyes glowed faintly violet. "Stay back, human," she hissed, breathing hard. "We don't need your tricks." David raised his hand slowly. "Easy, I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "You're going to hurt yourself if you keep lifting that alone." She looked at him with suspicion and fear. "Your kind caused the storms. Your machines poisoned the air. You brought war." Her voice shook with anger. David took a breath. He had heard that before. To many alien colonies, humans were the invaders, the destroyers of worlds. He couldn't blame her. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But right now we both just need a roof that doesn't fall on our heads." The woman didn't answer. She turned away and tried to lift the beam again, but it was useless. David stepped closer, knelt, and grabbed the heavy wood. "Here," he said. "Let me help." Together they raised it back into place. He used his metal brace from the supply kit to hold it steady. When they finished, the woman stood silently, her shoulders shaking. Her children peeked from behind her, whispering in their alien tongue. David smiled at them gently. "You two okay?" he asked. They nodded, hiding again. He glanced at the woman. "What's your name?" "Lyra," she said after a long pause. "My husband built this house before the last storm took him." David looked around at the broken shelter, the half-crushed cooking pot, the soaked blankets, the single toy lying in the mud. "You've been trying to fix it alone?" he asked. "I have no choice," she replied. "No one helps a widow with human blood near her home." David frowned. "That's not right." Lyra looked at him with tired eyes. "Right and wrong don't matter anymore. Only survival." For a while there was silence. The wind whispered through the broken walls. David stood there, unsure what to say. Then he noticed the two children staring at a small food pack in his hand. They were hungry, too thin for their size. He crouched down, opened the pack, and placed it near them. "Here, eat," he said. "It's just soup and bread, but it's warm." The younger child hesitated, then reached out slowly. Lyra almost stopped her, but then froze when the smell of food reached her. Hunger won over pride. They ate quietly, glancing at David between bites. As the sky darkened again, David looked up. More clouds were coming. "Another storm," he muttered. He started collecting fallen planks and metal scraps. Lyra watched him silently as he began repairing the outer wall. His movements were quick, practiced. The hammer in his hand struck with rhythm. "You don't have to," she said finally. "You could leave." David didn't stop working. "I could," he said. "But then this roof might fall again, and those kids don't deserve that." She said nothing after that. The rain returned, soft at first, then harder. David kept working even when it soaked his clothes and stung his eyes. His hands bled where the nails cut him, but he didn't stop. By the time night came, part of the shelter stood again. He made a small fire and sat near the entrance. The alien children slept beside their mother, safe and dry for the first time since the storm. Lyra looked at him from the corner of her eye. The human who should have left was still there, quiet, calm and kind. In the flickering firelight, David glanced at her and said softly, "No one should have to rebuild alone." Outside, the storm still raged, but inside that broken home a new story had begun. A story of trust, kindness, and the small, quiet beginning of something greater. The first light of dawn touched the shattered valley, painting it in pale gold. Smoke rose from distant ruins. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than thunder. David Cole opened his tired eyes, realizing he had fallen asleep sitting against the half-fixed wall. His hands were blistered and sore, but the small fire still burned beside him. Inside the shelter, Lyra was awake, watching him. She didn't move, her body tense like a coiled spring. The human had stayed through the night, something no one from her world would have done. Her children were still asleep, their small faces calm for the first time in weeks. When David stood, his legs almost gave out. He stretched, groaning quietly, then smiled as he looked at the rebuilt section. "Not bad," he murmured. "Still need to fix the roof, though." Lyra's eyes followed him warily. "You worked all night," she said softly. "Yeah," David replied, rubbing his neck. "Didn't want the rain to ruin what's left." He looked at her, his blue eyes tired but gentle. "You and the kids get any sleep?" She hesitated before answering. "Some," he nodded. "Good. Let's see what we can do about breakfast." He pulled out a small ration pack from his satchel and opened it. Steam rose as he poured water into the container, making a simple soup. The smell filled the air, warm, comforting, human. The children stirred. The younger one, a girl with small silver horns, blinked up at David. Her brother whispered something in their alien tongue. Lyra gave a warning glance, but they ignored her and kept watching him, their eyes wide and full of quiet hunger. David smiled and placed the food in front of them. "Go ahead," he said. "It's safe." Lyra wanted to refuse. Her pride screamed that they didn't need help from a human. But when the children took their first cautious bites, she couldn't stop them. The warmth spread through their small bodies, and they ate fast, almost afraid the food would disappear. David pretended not to notice their hunger and turned his attention to the roof. "You've got a lot of damage here," he said, climbing up carefully. "These beams are too weak to hold. I'll have to reinforce them." "You don't have to do this," Lyra said again, standing outside, her arms crossed. He looked down at her. "You said that last night." "You're right, I don't have to. But I want to." Lyra frowned. "Why?" David shrugged. "Because I've been where you are. Lost everything. It's not easy rebuilding alone." She didn't reply. Her gaze dropped to the ground, remembering her husband's last day. He had died pulling another family from a flood zone. When she buried him, the others in her village turned away. They said helping a human colony had cursed their land. Since then, no one had spoken to her. While she thought, David hammered another board into place. The sound echoed through the valley. He laughed once when a piece of metal slipped and nearly hit him. "Guess I'm out of practice," he said, chuckling. Lyra blinked. He was laughing, even here in all this ruin. Humans were strange. By midday, the sun grew hotter. David wiped sweat from his face and looked at the small home. "We're getting there," he said proudly. But then, without warning, part of the roof gave way. A loud crack split the air and a sheet of metal crashed down, scattering dirt everywhere. The children screamed. Lyra grabbed them, pulling them close. David groaned. "All right," he said, coughing from the dust. "The storm winds round too." To his surprise, Lyra let out a small laugh, a sound dry and nervous but real. "You are stubborn," she said. He grinned. "I take that as a compliment." He examined the damage again. "We can fix this," he said confidently. "But we'll need better support beams. Maybe I can find something near the ridge." "You'll be gone for hours," Lyra warned. "Then start without me," David said. "I'll be back before sunset." Before leaving, he looked at the children and added softly, "Stay safe, all right?" They nodded shyly. Lyra watched as he walked away through the debris, the wind catching his jacket. The image of a human risking himself for strangers felt wrong, but it also stirred something inside her heart she hadn't felt in years. When he disappeared over the hill, she looked back at the half-built roof. Her hands clenched. For the first time since her husband's death, she picked up a hammer. That day, while David searched for supplies and Lyra worked alone, both of them began something greater than rebuilding a house. They started rebuilding trust. The storm had taken much, but what it left behind was quietly growing stronger. By the time David returned to the valley, the suns of Alaris were sinking behind the blue hills, painting the sky in soft purple and gold. His arms were full of scavenged materials, metal rods, sturdy wooden beams, and a bundle of old cables from a crashed transport drone. Sweat streaked his dusty face, but there was a small, proud smile tugging at his lips. When he reached Lyra's shelter, he froze for a moment. The scene before him made his chest tighten. Lyra was standing on a small stool, struggling to nail a plank into the wall. Her hands trembled and her movements were clumsy, but she was doing it. Working. The children were gathering stones and passing her nails one by one. David couldn't help but grin. "Hey," he called softly. "Didn't think you'd start without me." Lyra almost dropped the hammer in surprise. "You said to start," she replied quickly, trying to hide the blush of embarrassment. He laughed gently and set down the materials. "I did, and I've got to say you're a fast learner." She gave him a cautious look, but there was a hint of pride in her tone when she said, "The wall hasn't fallen yet." "Yet," David said with a playful smile, walking closer. "Let's make sure it doesn't." Together they began reinforcing the wall. The rhythm of their work filled the air, the hammer striking metal, wood cracking, nails sliding into place. The children watched them, whispering in awe. The human and the widow worked like they had done this 100 times before. But when David leaned on one side to adjust the angle, the support beam gave a deep groan. He barely had time to shout before the entire section of wall tilted forward and came crashing down with a cloud of dust and splinters. Lyra jumped back, shielding her children. David rolled to the side, coughing, covered in mud. For a moment there was silence. Then David started laughing. Lyra stared at him wide-eyed. "You laugh?" "The wall fell," she exclaimed. He grinned, brushing dirt from his hair. "Yeah, and it almost took me with it. But that's how you learn what not to do." The absurdity of his calmness made her blink, then, against her will, she laughed too. A soft, surprised laugh that made her eyes shine for the first time since her husband's death. When the laughter faded, David stood and said, "Okay, Storm wins round 2. But I'm still in the game." He set the broken planks aside and began rebuilding, this time explaining each step to Lyra. "See this? If you brace the beams in a triangle, they can handle more pressure. Straight lines break easy, triangles hold." She nodded, watching closely. "Triangles," she repeated quietly as if it were a secret spell. They worked for hours. David handed her tools, showed her how to drive nails properly, how to balance the weight. The sun faded completely and the sky filled with stars. The children lit a small lantern that glowed faint green, the color of alien light. As they worked, Lyra began to talk. "My husband was a builder," she said softly. "He used to say a home is more than walls. It's the feeling that you are safe." David paused, his hand still on the hammer. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," she whispered. "He saved many lives when the flood hit last year. He never came back." David looked down, his voice quiet. "I'm sorry." "It was the humans they blamed after that," she said bitterly. "They said his kindness to your kind brought the curse." David didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, then replied, "Kindness isn't a curse. It's just rare." Lyra looked at him for a long time. For the first time, she didn't see a stranger. She saw someone who carried the same grief she did, someone trying to rebuild something invisible. When the final nail went in, David stepped back. "There," he said. "Try giving it a push." Lyra pressed her hand against the wall. It didn't move. The structure stood firm. A smile spread across her face, small but real. "It's strong," she said. "Because we built it together," David replied. "That's the secret." She looked at him again, her expression softer now. "Maybe kindness hasn't died after all." David smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure it lives here." As the night breeze moved through the half-finished home, the sound of the two children giggling echoed across the quiet valley. For the first time in many months, the little family wasn't rebuilding in fear. They were rebuilding with hope. And under the alien stars of Alaris, the human and the widow stood side by side, unaware that their small act of cooperation was already beginning to change more than just one broken house. It was changing 2 broken hearts. By the 4th day, the house no longer looked like a ruin. The walls stood firm, the roof held steady, and the wind no longer howled through broken gaps. Smoke from a small cooking fire rose above the valley, curling gently into the blue morning sky. It was a peaceful sight, too peaceful perhaps for the nearby villagers who had begun to whisper about it. From the hill above, a group of alien villagers stood watching, Their tall, lean shapes were wrapped in gray cloaks, their silver eyes narrow with suspicion. That human still hasn't left, one murmured. He sleeps under her roof now? Another spat into the dirt. The widow has lost her mind. First, she let him live. Now she feeds him. Down below, David was repairing the final section of the wall, humming quietly to himself. He didn't notice the eyes watching from afar. Beside him, Lyra was mixing clay with ash to seal the gaps, while her children played nearby, stacking small stones into tiny towers. For the first time, their laughter returned to the valley. Careful with that edge, David said, pointing to a sharp corner. Lyra nodded. I'm not as strong as you, she said softly. He smiled. You don't have to be. You're precise, and that's what makes this work. Lyra felt a strange warmth in her chest at those words. Compliments were something she hadn't heard since before her husband's death. She tried to hide her small smile, but David caught it anyway. They worked until midday. The sun glowed above the silver trees, and the air smelled of fresh soil and smoke. Lyra's hands were rough and bruised, but she didn't care. Each hammer strike made her heart feel steadier. Then came the sound of footsteps. 5 villagers approached from the ridge, led by Aaron, the village elder's son. His voice carried a tone of cold authority. Widow Lyra, he called out. You have allowed a human into our land. You know what that means, Lyra froze. David straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. I'm guessing this isn't a friendly visit, he said quietly. Aaron stepped closer. His gray eyes glared at David. You will leave this place, human. You bring disaster wherever you walk, David didn't argue. He simply looked at Lyra. Your home's almost finished. I can pack up if you want me gone. The words hit her harder than she expected. Her throat tightened, but before she could speak, Aaron sneered. You think her pity will protect you? The last time a human came here, we lost 3 farms and 2 families. David sighed. I didn't come here to take anything, just to help. Aaron stepped closer, his hand gripping the hilt of a blade carved from alien bone. Help or control? Before the situation could turn worse, Lyra moved between them. Enough, she said sharply. Her voice was low but steady. He rebuilt what the storm destroyed. None of you came when my children were cold and hungry. None of you lifted a finger when my home fell. He did. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Aaron frowned, taken aback. You defend him? I defend what is right, Lyra said. If kindness is a crime, then I'm guilty. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind stirred the dust at their feet. Finally, Aaron turned away. You've been warned, he said, his voice colder now. When the next storm comes, and it will come, remember who you've chosen to trust. He motioned for the others, and they left. When they were gone, David exhaled slowly. Guess I'm not on the guest list for dinner, he said, trying to lighten the tension. But Lyra's expression was unreadable. They fear what they do not understand, she said quietly. David looked at the house, the patched walls gleaming in sunlight. Then maybe we can show them something worth understanding. That night, the villagers watched again from afar. They saw the faint orange glow of firelight through the windows, the first sign of life that home had shown in months. They saw the human and the widow sitting side by side, sharing a meal, laughter softly breaking the silence. In the darkness, Aaron whispered to another villager, She'll regret this. But far below, inside that small rebuilt home, David and Lyra were beginning to feel something powerful, something the storms couldn't destroy. It wasn't just shelter. It was trust. It was the fragile, glowing start of hope between 2 worlds that had always feared each other. And as the 2 suns rose again the next morning, their light fell on the tiny home in the valley, a home that now stood as a quiet symbol that kindness could still exist, even when the world refused to believe in it. The days that followed were peaceful, or at least they seemed that way on the surface. The rebuilt home stood strong, its new walls reflecting the soft orange glow of the twin suns. Smoke from the chimney curled lazily into the sky, carrying the scent of roasted roots and herbs. For the first time in months, Lyra's children laughed freely. Even the local birds had begun to nest near the roof again, as if they too sensed safety. But peace on Alaris was never meant to last. Whispers were spreading through the nearby village. The sight of a human and an alien woman working together angered some of the older clans, especially those who still carried the wounds of the last human war. They said it was shameful, unnatural, that Lyra had betrayed her kind for comfort and pity. Every night new rumors grew like weeds, and in those whispers hatred began to take shape. David didn't know. To him, things were finally calm. That evening, he sat by the small fire outside, repairing one of his tools while Lyra cooked inside. Her children were playing a quiet game of stacking pebbles, giggling softly when the tower fell. The golden light from the fire painted the scene warm and gentle. For a moment, it almost felt like home again. Lyra looked out through the small window and smiled faintly. "You work even when there's nothing left to fix," she said. David shrugged. "That's how I stay sane," he said with a small grin. "If I stop working, I start remembering things I don't want to." She tilted her head. "What things?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "My wife, my son. I lost them when the dome city on Mars collapsed. I couldn't save them." Lyra's eyes softened. "I am sorry," she whispered. He smiled weakly. "You and me both lost something to storms, huh?" Before she could reply, the night wind shifted. It carried something new, the faint crackle of fire. At first, David thought it was just their campfire, but then he heard the sound again. Louder this time. A sharp hiss followed by a whoosh. He turned sharply toward the trees. Flames flickered in the dark, climbing fast. "Lyra," he shouted, standing up. "Get the kids inside!" But it was too late. From the shadows, a burning torch sailed through the air and crashed against the wall of their home. The dry planks caught instantly. The smell of burning wood filled the air. Lyra screamed. "No!" She grabbed a blanket, trying to smother the fire, while David ran for the water barrel. He threw bucket after bucket onto the flames, but they spread faster than he could fight them. From the ridge above, angry voices shouted, "Let the human burn. Let his lies die with him." David didn't stop. Smoke stung his eyes, his throat burned, and blisters rose on his hands. But he kept throwing water, kept shouting through the smoke. "Get the kids out, go!" The two small children were crying now, their faces streaked with ash. Lyra pushed them toward the trees, coughing. When she turned back, she saw David stumbling near the wall, trying to save what little remained. "David!" she cried. "It's too late." He didn't move. "I'm not leaving your home," he shouted. "Not again." The roof cracked above him. He lifted a fallen beam with both hands, muscles trembling, and threw it aside before collapsing near the doorway. Lyra ran to him, dragging him out as the fire swallowed the last of the roof. The night sky glowed orange and cruel. They fell to the ground together, coughing, gasping for air. The children ran to them, clinging to Lyra's arms. When the villagers saw what they had done, the flames lighting the valley like a wound, they grew silent. The anger that had driven them began to fade as guilt crept in. The human they had called dangerous had risked his life to save an alien home. When the fire finally died, only ashes remained. The house that had been their symbol of hope was gone. David lay on the ground, his hands burned and bleeding. Lyra knelt beside him, tears cutting through the soot on her cheeks. "You fool," she whispered. "You could have died." He looked up at her, weak but still managing a small smile. "Worth it," he said softly, "if your kids are safe." For a moment, Lyra couldn't speak. Then she reached out and gripped his hand tightly. "You will not rebuild this alone," she said, her voice trembling but strong. The next morning, when the smoke cleared, something incredible happened. The villagers came down from the hills, quiet, ashamed. One by one, they brought wood, tools, and food. None of them spoke, but their actions said enough. The house that burned in the night would rise again, not because of pity, but because of respect. And as the sun broke through the smoke, shining over the ruins, David realized that the storm hadn't destroyed their bond. It had forged it in fire. The ashes were still warm when the first beam went up. The morning sun glowed weakly over the valley, painting everything gold and gray. Smoke still curled from the ruins, but this time, the air carried something different. Not despair, but determination. David sat near what was once the doorway, his hands bandaged and trembling. His skin was raw, his lungs still burned from the smoke, yet he couldn't rest, not while there was rebuilding to do again. Beside him, Lyra kneeled in silence, staring at the blackened earth. Her children stood close, clutching her arms. Then came the sound of footsteps. David looked up and froze. From the ridge above, a group of villagers were walking toward them, slowly, carefully. Among them was Aaron, the same man who had threatened them days ago. He carried a bundle of wooden planks. Others followed, holding tools, metal sheets, and food. Lyra rose, confused. Why are you here? She asked quietly. Aaron lowered his head. Because you were right, he said. That human? He fought the fire while we watched. We let hate blind us. He stepped closer, placing the wood at David's feet. Let us rebuild what we destroyed. For a long time, no one spoke. Then David smiled faintly. Well, he said, his voice hoarse, let's make sure this one doesn't burn down. And so they began again. The village worked as one that day. Humans and aliens together, something that hadn't happened in decades. David guided them with his quiet voice, showing how to reinforce the supports, how to mix clay and steel for stronger walls, how to build channels that drained rainwater. He moved slowly because of his injuries, but his mind was sharp and his heart refused to rest. Lyra worked beside him every step. Her movements were steady now, confident. She had changed. The woman who once whispered in fear now gave orders, helped others, and smiled at the sight of her children laughing among the builders. By midday, the shape of a new house stood proudly against the valley. The children helped paint the outer wall with soft white clay. It looks brighter, the youngest said, dipping her tiny fingers in the paint. Like light, David chuckled. Then that's what we'll call it, he said. The House of Light. Lyra repeated the words softly, almost reverently. House of Light. When the sun set, they lit the new lamps inside. Instead of fire, David had installed salvaged solar panels from his crashed pod. The lights glowed soft and golden, spreading warmth without smoke. The villagers stood outside watching the light spill through the windows. It looked almost magical, a beacon of peace glowing in the darkness of a divided land. An old alien elder stepped forward, his voice shaking with emotion. In all my years, I have never seen this, he said. A human teaching our people to build again. David smiled humbly. I didn't teach you, he said. You just needed someone to remind you what you already knew. The elder bowed slightly. Then let this house remind us too, that hope burns brighter than fire. That night, as stars filled the alien sky, laughter and chatter echoed from the valley. The villagers shared food around the newly built home. The children played under the hanging lamps. Even Aaron sat near the fire, speaking quietly to David. I thought you were our enemy, Aaron admitted, but maybe the enemy was fear itself. David nodded. Fear builds walls. Trust builds homes. Lyra listened quietly, smiling as her children fell asleep beside her. The glow from the lamps reflected in her violet eyes, soft and full of gratitude. Later, when the villagers left and only the family remained, David walked to the edge of the valley. He looked up at the stars, 2 moons glowing above, and whispered, We did it, Maria. It was the first time he had spoken his late wife's name aloud in years. Behind him, Lyra stepped close. Who was she? My wife, he said softly. She loved light. Said it was proof that even darkness ends. Lyra looked at the glowing windows. Then she would have liked this house, David smiled. Yeah, she would. For the first time, neither of them felt like strangers. And as the wind carried the soft hum of the solar lights across the valley, the once cursed home stood as a symbol, a living proof that 2 broken hearts from 2 broken worlds could build something whole together. The storms had taken everything from them. But in the ruins, they had built something stronger than wood or stone. They had built light. Morning came quietly to the valley. The storm season had ended, leaving behind soft winds and clear skies. The twin sons of Alaris rose together, casting long golden rays over the hills. Dew glimmered on the grass like 1,000 tiny stars. And in the middle of that calm, the House of Light stood, bright, strong, alive. It had been months since the fire. The village that once whispered in hate now gathered every morning to learn from David and Lyra. Together, they built more homes, cleaner wells, and simple wind turbines that powered the lights. Where suspicion once ruled, cooperation had grown. David woke early, as always. He stood outside, stretching his sore arms, watching the sunrise reflect off the roof he had rebuilt twice. He could still hear laughter inside, the kind of soft, warm sound that healed old wounds. Lyra stepped out a moment later, holding 2 cups of steaming herbal tea. You never sleep in, she said with a teasing smile. He chuckled, taking a cup. Earth habits die hard. Back home, mornings meant work. Guess it still does. She looked toward the distant mountains where the last traces of burnt forest still lingered. You could have left, David. You could have gone back to your people. He turned to her, eyes calm. Maybe I already found them. She didn't reply, but her eyes softened. There were no walls between them now, only understanding. Inside, the children were awake, giggling as they packed small bundles of food for the day. Today was special. The village was holding a rebuilding festival, the first of its kind since before the war. They would celebrate what they had made together, a union of two species once divided by fear. When they reached the center of the village, the scene amazed even David. Flags of both human and alien design hung side by side. Music filled the air, a strange, beautiful blend of alien drums and human string instruments. Lyra's children ran ahead, chasing ribbons in the wind. Villagers waved to David, calling him Brother Builder, a name that made him grin despite himself. Aaron approached, carrying a carved wooden plaque. "For you," he said solemnly. "From all of us." David took it carefully. The alien script was rough but clear. Lyra read it aloud. "He built walls that sheltered us, but more importantly, he broke the ones that divided us." David blinked hard, his throat tightening. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. The elder of the village smiled. "Then don't say anything, human. Just stay." Laughter rippled through the crowd. The celebration went on, songs, food, stories. Lyra watched her children dance with others their age, their joy unguarded and free. For the first time since her husband's death, her heart felt light. She looked at David across the crowd, standing awkwardly as villagers clapped his shoulders and thanked him. He looked like he belonged. As the suns began to set, the sky turned deep orange and violet. Lanterns lit the paths, glowing like little stars across the village. When the last song faded, David and Lyra walked back together toward the house. The children ran ahead, carrying the plaque, their laughter echoing. When they reached home, the world was quiet again. Only the chirping of night insects filled the air. David stood under the twin suns, now dipping toward the horizon. Their light turned his hair gold. Lyra stepped beside him. "You changed this place," she said softly. "You changed me." He smiled, looking at the glowing windows. "You changed me first." She tilted her head. "You could still go back to Earth one day." He paused, then looked at her, eyes gentle, certain. "Maybe, but some homes aren't made of stone or wood. They're made of people." She held his gaze for a long, silent moment, then whispered, "Then stay." The sun slipped below the hills, their last rays spilling across the rebuilt roof. David nodded slowly. "All right," he said softly. "I'll stay." Lyra's children ran up and hugged him tightly, their small hands gripping his arms. "Papa, come see," they shouted, dragging him toward the door. And for the first time, David didn't correct them. He just smiled. Inside, the lamps flickered warmly. The plaque hung above the door, shining faintly in the golden light. Outside, the night deepened, but the house of light glowed brighter than ever, its radiance spreading far beyond the valley, a signal that kindness and courage could still rebuild a broken world. Under the twin sons of Alaris, the human who came to fix a shelter had found a home, and the widow who once rebuilt alone no longer had to lift the walls by herself. Their story ended where it began, beneath the calm after the storm, not with destruction, but with a promise under two suns.